I don't know what it's different.
Yeah, well, that's what you get.
All right, we still there?
There you go.
7C?
Maybe 1,600 watts.
Okay.
You'll also be able to run refrigerator or room AC.
Some newer FM transceivers support a digital voice capability. We call those digital modes. And the basic three are DMR for digital mobile radio, D-Star, which is digital smart technology for amateur radio, and System Fusion. Now, they are somewhat proprietary, even though they claim to be open source. DMR is, to the best of my knowledge, truly open source. D-Star, the protocol is open source, but they use some codec chips, which are proprietary. The same thing is true for System Fusion. So you wind up, if it's basically a Chinese radio, they're using DMR. If it's ICOM or Kenwood, they're using D-Star. If it's Yaesu, they're using System Fusion. So up until recently, there was no intercommunications between those. Now, and because these all work through the internet to do things like, they call them talk groups in DMR, they call them reflectors in D-Star, and I don't know what they call them in System Fusion. I've never used it. Are they reflectors or something else?
I generally avoid proprietary, semi-proprietary digital modes.
Okay.
And the mode is not proprietary, but it's the audio codecs that they bought. that
Right,
are the proprietary.
And I don't quite understand all the thing about that, why,
Yeah.
but I think it's money. I think in order to use that codec, you got to pay somebody. So that's why other people don't necessarily do it.
So why then the ARRL, why the grant have someone write a codec to make it public?
You can, I've been told, interconnect between these in the internet. There's gateways or converters, whatever they call them, which supposedly will allow you to go from one protocol to another. I have yet to try that, but I understand it is doable. It's probably harder than trying to program your radio, though.
If you're on the Pi-Star, if you're on any of the Pi-Star forums, it's a continuous issue. There are lots and lots of questions on there that nobody can answer.
One of the reasons that the digital voice modes are popular is because you can route the signal over the internet to repeaters all over the world. Where, we have things like SARNet, and there's similar things in other parts of the country where SARNet is what, like 40 repeaters connected together through microwave. Doesn't use the internet. Other systems might or might use telephone lines to interconnect. The digital voice modes all go through the internet through a gateway. And going through one of the talk groups or reflectors, which allow you to have a virtual connection, and you can select a worldwide talk group or reflector or a local one. You can set up your own talk group for just say your local amateur radio club could have their own talk group. Why don't we do that?
Set up our own talk group.
Yeah,
On,
because we don't have a DMR repeater.
on which network? Are you talking about Brandmeister or TGIF or Brandmeister won't let you create new talk groups anymore.
Really? They used to,
They used to, but they won't let you create a permanent,
but you
what
could
do
do
they
a,
call them, dynamic.
yeah,
Yeah, you can create a dynamic, or temporary talk group that is based on your DMR ID. But you can't create one that's gonna stay in their.
Okay.
Library.
There's also a thing called a hotspot, which acts kind of like a half duplex repeater. It's not full duplex in that it doesn't transmit and receive at the same time. It transmits and receives on the same frequency. So it allows you to make a connection to the internet so that you can talk to all of these other repeaters, depending on whether you're doing D-Star, DMR, or whatever. And you can have the hotspot set up for any or all of those. Could actually operate all three at the same time, except you really only get one at a time. Okay, whichever one is currently active. In other words, if it picks up a signal on somebody talking on DMR, then it's not listening to D-Star or Fusion while that conversation's going on. If you really wanted to do all three.
Yeah, what's the difference between duplex and simplex?
Simplex and duplex. He's asking what the difference is between simplex and duplex.
Is he talking about with regards to a hotspot?
Or just in general? In general, simplex means only one person is transmitting at one time and everyone else is listening. Okay, with duplex, you can actually have two different things going on at the same time. One person on the repeater is speaking into the repeater on one frequency, and it's coming back out of the repeater at the same time on a different frequency. So you can have a two-way conversation. Then you talk about synchronous and asynchronous.
No, we don't need to talk about
Okay.
that. Just full duplex and half duplex.
Yeah.
Or simplex.
Yeah.
We called it half duplex back in my day.
Half duplex.
That was before radio.
Before radio?
You said that, we didn't.
Yeah.
And actually, you're probably not aware of it, but your Wi-Fi at home, if you're over the air with a access point, you're actually running half duplex. So you only get half the bandwidth that you would if you were connected with a cable on Ethernet. Because it uses the same frequency. Not two different.
Quick question about Ethernet. So I have like a 200-foot Ethernet cable and it does not work at all.
I heard the 200-foot cable. What was the first part?
It does not work at all. I'm guessing it's because something is interfering with it, but sometimes on very rare occasions when I switch the USB or the Ethernet port, it actually starts working for like a few hours and then cuts off again.
Well, a 200-foot cable for Ethernet is really out of specification.
Well, I mean, it runs from downstairs to upstairs to over here.
Okay, but I'm saying if it's 200 feet long, it's probably not going to work well. What you need
It doesn't.
is another access point to act as a repeater, or put a switch in between, an active switch to power the signal.
What do you mean active switch?
Well, you can go buy an Ethernet switch, a 4-port for $10, $20. And run the signal, put it like halfway between your router and whatever you're trying to get to, your computer or whatever. And just use two shorter cables. And that
And the
that
Ethernet,
switch will actively amplify the signal again.
so the Ethernet switch like allows it to or acts like a repeater.
Yes,
But here's the thing. So this 200-foot Ethernet cable like used to work like constantly, but now it doesn't.
well, there could be some other form of interference that's new.
How exactly does interference work?
It's hard to say without seeing the whole thing, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely if you've got a 200-foot long cable, it's not going to be very reliable.
That it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So either you could set up a separate access point as a repeater. Although that's doing it on Wi-Fi. If you just want to stick with the Ethernet cable, then you probably need to put a switch in there to amplify and essentially repeat the signal.
Yeah, would it work just to like cut the Ethernet cable in half, put two connections on it, and then connect to the switch instead of getting two separate small cables?
Two separate cables?
Instead of taking two separate cables, can I just cut the main Ethernet cord in half, put two connectors on it, and have it rolling?
You're saying you've got, say, two 100-foot cables with a connector between them?
Like I make two 100-foot cables out of a 200-foot cable.
We make the 200-foot cable.
Oh, and you crimp the connectors on yourself?
Yeah, do you need a special tool to crimp it, or can you just use pliers?
You need a special crimping tool for those little modular connectors, yes. And you,
All right, thanks for the information.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what function is performed with a transceiver and a digital mode hotspot?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Brenda, wake up.
I'm here. I would say alpha.
All right. Yeah, hotspots don't do FT8. And they don't do RTTY, RTTY. And I don't know how you would use it for meteor scatter. Okay, so we talked about DMR and D-Star a little bit. Both of them require that you have your call sign programmed into the radio. In the case of DMR, it's a little more complicated than it is with D-Star, in that you have to have your call sign, you have to program the color code for the repeater or the hotspot, the time slot, since there's two time slots in DMR, and your DMR ID, which you have to go register to get a DMR ID. So you've got to put all that information in to do DMR.
Mhm.
For D-Star, you have to register with D-Star, or forgot what the other thing's called, where you can register. But you only have to have your call sign in the radio.
Register for what?
D-Star.
Okay,
You have to
And-
register your call sign in the D-Star database.
And you go about registering via the computer?
Yeah, you do it, you can do it online, you need to go, and I can't remember the website off the top of my head. I haven't done it in a long time. But
Okay.
there's a website, actually more than one. I think you can do it on Radioddity or Radio ID, whatever it
There is
is.
a website called Radio ID where you can get a DMR ID. I don't know what other.
I think they may also do D-Star.
Might.
But in both cases, you have to go register either your call sign in the case of D-Star or to get a DMR ID, and you put your call sign in there when you do the registration with Brandmeister or the other. There's two ways to do that one. But you have to put all this other information in the radio. You have to know, and the color code is sort of equivalent to the tone that you would program in for a repeater. Like if the repeater says it uses a tone of 131.8, in the case of DMR, you're going to have a color code that's 0 through 32 or 1 through 32. Anyway, there's 32 color codes. And that's kind of the equivalent. The color code has to match. Why it's called color code, I have no idea. It's kind of like code plug, another one of those things.
Yeah, it was explained to me that it is basically the equivalent of your PL tone.
Right. It's just a number. But it has to match. And then the time slot, because there's two time slots,
Mhm.
so you have to say which time slot you want to listen to or talk on. I don't know how you set it up to do both time slots. And that's one of the things that they push is it's got two time slots, so you could have two conversations going, but I don't know how that really works. In the case of DMR, if you want to do the talk groups, okay, they have a identification code for each talk group. So that's part of the thing that you program in. So you set up a channel on your radio for talk group 7, which I actually think is one of them, right?
What's that?
7, talk group 7, like local.
Familiar with what?
I don't remember the numbers. I haven't done TMR in a long time. But anyway, whatever talk groups you want to do, that has to be programmed in. So it's be a separate channel for each talk group.
Okay.
Hey, I gotta go. Have a good day.
Okay. We'll have the videos up today or tomorrow.
All right, thanks. Bye.
I did.
So
I have a question. Does your group, are they, anyone there in talk groups or anything like that?
no, and I don't really do DMR.
That was my question.
I only know one, no, Joe does the DMR because he talks to people up north.
Okay.
And, yeah, if you're a snowbird, it's the snowbirds that will do that
Yeah.
more.
Richard is on DMR. Now, I don't know how active he is on
Or
it now.
sunbirds. Sunbirds, all right. I was born in Cocoa Beach, so I'm a Yankee, according to my brothers. They were born in Key West.
Oh,
Brenda, the talk groups on DMR are generally set up for either location or interest. So like I have programmed in, but never actually used them. There's a veterans talk group. So I'm programmed in there, but I haven't actually heard any activity on that talk group.
Thank you for your service.
You're very welcome, sir. And then like one of the most, or probably the most active talk group on DMR is Talk Group 91, which is the World Talk Group. And then 3100, Talk Group 3100 is a USA talk group that, yeah, and trust me, there are literally dozens of them,
Oh, yeah.
if not hundreds.
Huh.
But yeah, if you get on, and of course, I'm talking about Brandmeister. I haven't tried TGIF or the other one, whatever it is. But yeah, the Brandmeister talk groups, there's a long list of them. And as Bob pointed out, when you program your DMR radio, when you make your code plug, you have to have a separate channel set up for each one, even if you are working off of the same repeater or the same hotspot. Each talk group requires its own channel.
Right. You're basically setting up a virtual channel for each of those.
Okay.
And it's the same kind of thing with D-Star, where they call them reflectors, but it's essentially the same thing. And there's a local one that has a net I've been on a couple times, 37 Charlie. And usually if I get on, I just do one Charlie, which is the worldwide. And it's usually people in England, Australia, New Zealand, or South Korea. Quite a mix.
I know, Randy Clinton, I forget his call sign, he's a pilot for Southwest, he does the, D-Star stuff. But he's got the little hot spot at the house.
Okay, and then Dan mentioned a code plug,
Mhm.
and I hate that term. It's one of those things kind of like antenna tuner that's stuck around. Apparently, it actually was based on a physical plug back in the early days with the handheld radios, the Motorola, I think is where it started. And for commercial use, I mean, they would have separate channels set up for different functions, like in the police department or whatever. And because they didn't want people programming them or changing it,
Mhm.
it had a physical plug that programmed the radio of to what channels you had access to. And I think it was either diodes on the plug that determined whether it was a 1 or a 0 or some sort of thing, but it was a physical plug that you plugged into the radio that programmed it. And that term is stuck, even though now it's just you're loading software in the radio.
Wow, when you said what it relates to, that made me think of the old, KW7, crypto units.
Oh,
Because that was a mess of wires, you know, you
Yeah.
have to jump and plug the block into the crypto unit.
I'm gonna have to go find an actual code plug sometime. I've never seen one.
Yeah.
See, you don't happen to have one of those old radios, do you? Really old Motorola?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is a talk group on a DMR repeater?
That would be Bravo.
Yep. I think we had this question, actually almost the same question last week or week before. Slightly worded different. So what does a DMR code plug contain?
Boy,
Bravo.
Bravo. All the stuff to program the radio. How is a specific group of stations selected on a digital voice transceiver?
be cool if I knew.
Charlie.
I'll go with that. What is the purpose of color code used on DMR repeater systems?
I'm not a DMR guy, but,
When you
uh,
It's not even, it's
I would
really
say Apple's that.
question.
Huh?
It's a tricky question.
No, it's not.
Color code, it doesn't mean the same thing to me.
Byron says he always wanted to be a DMR guy.
Yeah. So I found out, how difficult it was.
Well, it's not difficult to use, just to set up.
Oh,
Set
yeah.
up door.
I did do DMR, and my first contact was a guy in England who had actually worked here in Brevard County.
Hmm.
So he knew the exact park I was at when I told him where I was
Oh,
at.
okay, cool.
Oh, wow.
But that was sort of cool, but yeah.
Norman Pilling in England was my first DMR contact.
See, my first one was in England too,
Really? Yeah.
down by Cornwall, and they were telling me about their space program.
Oh.
Whoa,
Yeah, they're talking about maybe doing man stuff.
really?
Yeah.
Well, they were using, what's his names? The billionaire over there,
Oh, Virgin Galactic
Yeah.
Branson.
that guy. And they do horizontal launches and launch it off of the aircraft. So the color code is just an access code like the TL tone. And why they had to be different and call it color code instead of tone,
Hmm.
although it isn't an audio, well, the difference is it's a number. In the case of the tone, it's actually a low frequency audio signal, 130 kilohertz, what?
Before you move on to that, I got a comment.
Okay,
So color code, and we also talked about time slot. I don't know if there'll be a question about that coming up. But the color code and time slot, even though this is implying that it's used on a repeater,
Mhm.
okay, it doesn't matter if you're using a repeater, a hotspot, or you're going simplex with the DMR. The color code and time slot still have to match up.
Yeah, that's probably gonna be on another question.
Yeah, three things to match up.
Mhm.
okay, what's your question?
No, I was just reiterating that it's probably gonna be on another you've got a new thing up here. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it might be on the exam. Which of the following must be programmed into a D-Star digital transceiver before transmitting?
Mhm. Mhm.
Alpha.
Right. Okay, so HF transceivers usually have more buttons and knobs than what you'd find on a VHF or UHF transceiver, particularly a handy talkie. In the HF range, if you're doing single sideband, CW, any of those, you'll normally have separate bandpass filters for each of those modes, because you don't want to have the band or the bandwidth you're listening to any wider than you need, because that just brings in more noise and decreases the signal to noise ratio. If you're doing single sideband, typically the radio is going to have somewhere around 2400 hertz filter. Might be 25, could be 23, somewhere in that range. Because the bandwidth, as you remember, for single sideband is how much?
I like the 2.4.
3 kilohertz. So they're chopping off a little. I don't know why they don't use 3 kilohertz filters. They use 24, 25.
And then if you look at the card he's got there, when you look at the 60,
Oh, 60 meter?
yes.
The weird one?
meters, it tells you 2.8. Is your
Um,
channel width.
And you're actually transmitting maybe 3 kilohertz. But on receive, normally they cut the ends off a little bit because there's no significant information if you lose a couple hundred hertz on the ends. If you're doing CW, it's normally around a 500 hertz filter. Now, the reason those are in red is there's test questions. You have to remember those two numbers.
Mhm.
And basically, you want to match up the filter bandwidth with the mode that you're operating on. If you were operating AM, you'd have a much wider filter because it's 6 megahertz wide. And if you were doing FM, it could be 10 to 15 megahertz, kilohertz, excuse me. So what is the advantage of having multiple receive bandwidth choices on a multi-mode transceiver?
Ooh. I like,
None of them?
always, yeah. If you got a digital, you could always do that.
Delta?
It's good for contesting,
Which one?
being,
Be good for contesting?
because that's when you have a lot of adjacent channel noise. But if you have a digital radio. I'm gonna say B, because that's the most similar.
Yeah, I would do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would go with B. Several modes at once.
With digital, you can do that.
Well, not really. But
Dual receive.
I guess I could do that on my 7610.
It's a digital receiver.
Well, it's not just that, but it's dual receiver and I'm assuming I could set up the second receiver for a different mode. Haven't tried it.
Yeah.
They didn't take that into account on that question. Average person wouldn't know that. They got away with one. Which of the following receiver bandwidths provide the best signal to noise ratio for single sideband?
Charlie too.
Did you get that one, Brenda?
I'm sorry, I had a phone call come in and
Oh, well, I'll back up.
would you?
Which of the following receiver bandwidths provides the best signal to noise ratio for single sideband reception?
Oh, okay, let's see here. That would be Charlie.
Charlie, you were paying attention.
Well, yeah, kinda. I try.
A lot, I don't know, maybe most HF transceivers have a function called, it's usually a button called receiver incremental tuning, or RIT. Sometimes it's referred to as a clarifier because that's kind of what it does. If you're making a contact, you're transmitting on a specific frequency. Somebody answers you, they're not exactly on the same frequency. So they're, particularly if it's single sideband, their voice is going to sound really weird depending on what the difference is. You know, the rain barrel or the duck or whatever. So you can adjust the frequency of the receive with the RIT control. So you can have us listen on a separate frequency that you're transmitting on, so you can clarify the signal you're receiving. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and usually where you run into this is most of the time people will operate exactly on whatever frequency it is. But if they're running an older tube type system, they may not be exactly on frequency. So that's where that comes in, like you're talking on 14.2 megahertz. And they're
Just, yeah,
supposed to be on 14.2 megahertz, but maybe you're hearing them at 14.201 or something like that.
yeah, just because their display says 14.2 or the dial, whatever, it may not be exact. It depends on the calibration and whether or not you get frequency drift,
Mhm.
things like that,
And your equipment is not subject to that. near
as much.
Mhm.
But even with the new stuff, like some of the ICOMs, it's still in spec, but there's a specification for how much it can be off. And as it heats up, they'll drift, and then the fan comes on and it goes back. And they'll sit there and go back and forth.
And that's why they sometimes offer a TXCO temperature.
Compensated crystal oscillator,
Yeah, crystal oscillator.
basically puts it in a little oven, so it's a constant temperature.
Okay.
So once it warms up, it stays at a more constant.
Yeah, so
frequency.
after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, your radio is going to be on rock solid. But only if you're doing digital modes is that usually necessary. Voice, who cares?
Yeah, you can always use the RIT and fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. Which of the following controls could be used if the voice pitch of a single sideband signal returning to your CQ call seems too high or low?
That's a valuable question, wouldn't you say so? Dan?
I'm with you.
Delta.
Delta. All right, push to talk. It's kind of required. Although some can operate in what they call Vox mode, voice operated transmit receive, where when it detects a signal on the microphone strong enough, it will actually switch to transmit mode. But whether it has that mode or not, it will have a push to talk switch somewhere. In the case of a handy talkie, it's right there on the side. In a base station, if it's got a connected microphone, it's usually on the microphone. Some situations, it can be a foot switch. If you got one of those standalone microphones, and you can actually have a little switch on the floor that you step on when you want to talk, or you can operate in Vox
I
mode.
imagine most pilots probably have voice activated and they have it set where it's, over the background noise of the plane.
Yeah. Probably contesting where you need both hands.
Yeah,
If you're gonna, because you got to write stuff down and
yeah.
So I wonder if I'm the only person that invested $40 in a foot switch and then sit it on my desktop, so I have to press it with my hand. Because my wife doesn't think my shoes should be on top of it.
okay. Well, I have a separate, just a switch.
Yeah, the thumb switch, yeah.
Because I have a headset, so the mic and everything's there.
Yeah.
What is the function of a transceiver's push to talk input? Well, we didn't talk about what to do with this. It's used to switch between receive and transmit.
Yeah, I don't think there's a better use for it.
No,
Say Bravo.
and in most cases, it's supplying a ground to the radio in order to put it in that mode. That seems to be the standard. Because it has to operate with other equipment like a power amplifier. So you have to switch the power amplifier into transmit or receive mode also. Okay, so we talked about hotspots, allowing you to get on the internet for some of the digital modes. We talked about DMR with the talk groups, code plugs, color codes. And we talked about D-Star, which is easier to use. I like it better, but it's just personal preference. DMR is more popular. Usually things like that because of cost. You can get DMR radios for, what'd you say, under $100?
Well, this one right here was like $85 when I bought it. I think they're running about 90 right now.
When you go with Fusion or D-Star, you're talking 500 plus.
Well,
So
that looks like just a regular, what, transceiver? Is that an auto transceiver?
It is a transceiver.
yeah, it's just a regular handheld transceiver. It's just depends on whether it has DMR, D-Star, or Fusion mode,
Capabilities,
right? And
okay,
and that costs more, even in the case of DMR. I mean, you can get a regular DMR, I mean, a regular Baofeng for $20-$25. If you want one with DMR capability, it's like 80, 90 and up.
oh, okay.
And unfortunately, D-Star and Fusion are, I don't know of any under $500.
Yeah.
I think mine was $650. I think the new Kenwood they just came out with is like $800. Well,
It's a big.
wait till you look at a base station.
Okay.
You're looking at 1,000 plus.
No wonder you said this is an expensive hobby.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but once you get in, most people somewhere between, 3, 5, 10,000 tops, they're pretty happy with what they've got.
$10,000?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Well, that wouldn't be hard to do.
the thing is, your HF radio, if you're buying Japanese radio, it's gonna start at about $1,000 for an HF radio, a world band radio. And then your antennas and coax and stuff like that. And a lot of people like to go a little bit nicer instead of the base radio for $800-900.
Okay.
They'll buy like a $1,500 or a $2,000 radio and you can spend close to $10,000 on
Oh.
a radio by itself.
The top end ICOM is 13,000.
When you say ICOM, is that a brand?
Yes.
of-
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's ICOM, Yaesu, the two big brands.
Kenwood,
Kenwood,
and then you're the boutique stuff.
yeah, Flex and
Yeah.
Elecraft and those, and they're high-priced boutique stuff.
And Byron forgot the other half of the expense, and that is where whatever you spend on ham radio, you have to give it equal amount to your spouse.
But it's like any hobby.
I'm a bachelor, so I don't worry about that expense.
You know, if you get into photography,
Mhm.
you're talking those kind of numbers. Most hobbies get expensive. If you're into a boat,
No.
how much money you sink in the ocean?
Fishing, going
And
fishing,
most guys will hold on to their radios 5-10 years. Sometimes more if they really like it.
So what do you think about used radios?
Okay. I can
Depends on the
speak-
source.
I can speak on this firsthand because last week on Friday, I bought a radio from a club member.
Okay.
He's moving and doesn't want to put up antennas at his new residence, so he decided to sell his ICOM 7300, which is about $1,100 radio. And he didn't want to get on eBay and
Mhm.
sell it and have to deal with shipping and somebody at the other end saying that it was damaged when they received it or anything like that.
Yeah.
So he offered it to club members first and he gave me a price of $650
Mhm.
and I talked to the wife and she said, so what am I getting for $650? So I immediately Zelled her $650 and sent an email and sent an email.
cost you 1,300.
It actually cost me, yeah, the $1,100 radio cost me $1,300.
Yeah, but he threw in the power supply, right?
He did throw in the power supply.
And that's $100
And
bucks.
a power distribution
Oh,
strip,
wow.
so,
Just the
Yeah.
source, make sure you know.
Yeah.
yeah.
But,
Make sure
you know,
and
we know where he
told me-
lives.
Yeah,
Ah,
and he told me specifically, try it out. If you don't like it, he says, I'll give you your money back.
okay.
I would
My
be
wife
very
would-
hesitant to buy a used amateur radio on eBay.
Okay,
And should you decide to buy one on eBay or from anybody else that you don't know, be sure of what you're getting. Because when you see just like the case I was just telling you, the 7,300,
Mhm.
you'll find 7,300s on eBay for $500. But they're the Japanese version.
Right.
Which has a tighter frequency restriction than ours.
And different frequency bands.
Yes.
oh, wow, okay.
And some of the stuff will be in Japanese.
Well,
And that's the
what
problem
it
with,
says on all the chips inside.
okay. So, we talked about bandwidth filters that you need to match the filter for the mode that you're operating on. The RIT control to compensate for somebody you're talking to transmitting on a slightly different frequency than you're listening on. Or that you're transmitting on, I should say. And the push to talk button. So